Okay, all right. So should we kick off then? All right, to everyone watching, uh, thank you very much for joining this last webinar in the series um, of sex relationships and the SCI Man. Today, as you can see, you've been invited to my bedroom, but that is not a precursor to anything at all. We have got Michelle Donald here. Michelle doesn't need all that much of an introduction to anyone working in the sector. She's a psychosexual therapist who has a spinal cord injury herself. She is the authority on this area of the world sex relationships and spinal cord injuries. And she's been watching the other webinars, and her presentation is a perfect summation of all of that. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Michelle. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. It's been brilliant watching all of the sessions and sort of bringing together some of the things that people have been saying within those sessions. So I hope I do that as part of what I'm talking about today. It is important, and thank you, Tom, for saying actually I am spinally injured myself, and I forget to mention that because when I'm in the room with a client, obviously they can see that I'm a manual chair user. I'm paralysed at T12, so I'm from my waist down. And they can see that, and then I forget on Zoom that people can't see that. So thank you. And I also forget I'm in a chair most of the time. So yeah, I was paralysed in 1996, having come off the back of a motorbike where the back wheel seized, and that was quite a strange thing, having to go into a spinal unit. Then luckily I got 5 months rehab. And this is the reason I chose to be a psychosexual therapist, because in the spinal centre, and unfortunately things haven't changed massively, often there isn't a lot of information about sex and relationships while you're there. People do tend to concentrate very much so on the rehab, and that's what you're
Did,
there for.
did you have a history in therapy then before you were injured?
No, I didn't. Oh, no. It was something became really passionate about. So I was a travel agent. I had my British Airways exams, but that was me. So when I first became paralysed, I went to work with Relate. I worked at Relate doing my couples degree. So it was couples counselling, which gave me a massive insight into how people join together, and the types of different people that they are and what their needs are from each other. So people's couple fit. I found that so interesting. So doing the couples work for 3 years before I actually started to do psychosexual therapy was a massive insight. And I'm glad that had I had a degree before, I might just have been able to get straight on the psychosexual course. So I think it's really important to sort of have some sort of idea about those relationships and the strengthening of relationships, and how trauma can have a massive impact on how, as establishing relationships or relationships that have been together for a long time, really can hit a different degree. So you might be with someone because they feel something that you feel you haven't got. So for instance, you might want to be with somebody who's strong and sturdy and can do certain tasks in the house, so to speak, or you might be with someone because of their emotional state, and then all of a sudden a trauma happens, and that changes that other person for a short amount of time until they find themselves again. Because we know when you're spinally injured, it takes a long time to find yourself again. I wasn't Michelle for quite a long time after my injury, and just thought, where was my identity? And we talk about identity because it is part of our sexuality. It's who we are. So I'll talk a lot more about that as I go through this. So, let me just, there we go. I was asked when I was first injured, to do a naked photo shoot with Gok Wan, for those of you old enough to remember the Gok Wan series. I think for a lot of people, initially, when we are first injured, or this can happen at any time in our lives, of course it can. Body image is huge for so many of us. And when I was asked to do this, I first said no, and then I said, okay, if I can't see myself naked, how am I supposed to ask my clients to be confident in who they are around their bodies? And I thought it was amazing. The gentleman who was to my right, as I was facing forward, was worried initially about his leg bag showing. We had to keep the continuity with the leg bag being empty. So certain things around all the different disabilities that make us look different. The gentleman that you can see behind me, he was circumcised, and I turned around and, not knowing that I was studying psychosexual therapy at the time, I went, oh, that's an interesting piece you have there. And I think he just thought I was being really rude. Anyway, it's my sense of humour, and we'll leave that there. So I think it's really important initially to be okay about your own body, and that can take a long time. So how might we feel? And I often look at and relate this to classic car. So previously we were automatic, we just jump in and we drive, and obstacles, we could go around them. It's okay if I don't know where I'm heading, it's not a problem, I can find my way back. My body's so much more reliable. You fuel up and go, you get the occasional bump, you dent and you reshape. I remember after my injury, I went into the hospital not knowing I was spinally injured. They took me straight into Lancaster Hospital, and I said, oh, it's all right, broken bones mend, and everybody burst into tears. So I look at now, we can see ourselves as a different being sometimes, and it's about all those different adjustments that we have to make, and they can take time. So a bit rusty, I don't move as well as I used to, I can't see so clearly now. And when I've put that, I think that's often about the medications that we take. Medications can really get in the way of so many things. They can help us, of course they can, in so many ways, and I would never tell people to come off their medication. But I think it's really important for people to know what they're on, why they're on it, and to readjust that on a regular basis with the supervision of their GP or their consultant. It's really important, because at the end of the day, any medication that you are on for pain will have an effect on what the sensation of your skin feels like, what the sensation of areas, the whole areas of your body feel. So the areas that we feel, it will numb them. So it's about getting that balance right. For genitalia, especially people with penises, then that's really different, because actually that can reduce. We can put it down to it being the penis not getting erect, and sometimes it might not be about that. And as in the first presentation, we looked at function, but actually function maybe not working as well because of the medications we're on. So we really need to look at what we're on and why we're on them. Antidepressants, again, they will change our libido. Any morphine-based medication will reduce our testosterone levels, especially over time. So I recommend that anybody gets their testosterone levels checked as soon as they can within the spinal units. Push it, contact me, I can write letters to the GPs. I'm just passionate about testosterone levels. It keeps us strong, it keeps us healthy. Menopausal women, I'm passionate about their testosterone levels. There's so much information about that. So when I say can't see clearly, that's what I mean about the medications you're on. Often we have to top up our lubrication. Engine is less reliable and it's not automatic. Unpredictable things happen. Overheating, bowels and bladder issues, spasms. So it's about managing all of those. and cannot tell one noise from another. It could be pain, it could be pleasure. And sometimes we don't know ourselves what's pain, what's pleasure. They're very close. When we look at orgasmic faces, often they look like they're in pain. So what I'll often say to people is really think about what level of comfort or discomfort are you feeling. I don't talk about it being painful. On a scale of 1 to 10, what is the sensation? Because often by describing it in language, we can take ourselves to a different place. I know my hypersensitivity when I was first injured was horrendous. I talk to people who can't cope with anything touching their skin. And actually, as a partner of that person, how does that feel? You know, actually, I can't touch them anywhere. If I can't touch them anywhere, what can we do? Again, sensation to do with I'm paralysed from a higher point. Well, what's the point in touching my partner if they don't feel anything below that? And that's what I want to talk about. So, am I better parked up or not? Not. We know how much pleasure, affection, touch, comfort, holding is so important. When we get a cuddle from someone, when we get held by someone, the chemicals that are released are serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin. So there are feel-good chemicals as well as our connection chemicals. And they're massively important. In the last talk that we had, I recall, and I wrote it down actually, about language. I have to ask for a cuddle when I want one, and this is part of the therapy that we work with as sex therapists, about enabling people to be able to ask for what they want as the person with the injury, depending on how high or whatever confidence level they have. Actually, it's really important for your control to be in control of how you ask things. You know, it can be quite sexy for somebody to be told what they want to happen to them. Or quite loving to say, actually, at this moment, all I want to do is touch your bottom or hold on to you, and be quite honest about it. But we have to feel confident enough with another person, or feel playful enough with another person to be able to do that. Okay, I love these quotes. Masters and Johnson were the first people that really started research in sex. They had big sex clinics in the United States, really interesting research that they did. A stiff penis does not make a solid relationship, and nor does a wet vagina. Absence of sensation does not mean absence of feelings. Inability to move does not mean inability to please. Inability to perform does not mean inability to enjoy. And loss of genitals does not mean loss of sexuality. And when I say loss of genitals, loss of sensation in genitals, or for some people, it can be loss of genitalia when they've been at war. I love this slide. One of the main reasons is I think we often feel that our sexuality has been inhibited or has been blocked. Often we are touched by people that we would never have imagined. So strangers touching us to evacuate our bowels, to turn us over, strangers seeing our bodies, strangers cleaning our genitalia. And initially how we manage that. And actually, for those who have to maintain that for the rest of their lives, having PAs and carers within their lives, within their homes, within their environments, as we heard in the last talk, how inhibiting that can be for people, in that not only does it have a massive effect on the spinally injured person, but it has a massive effect on a partner or a new partner. Getting into new relationships when the relationship with the PA or the carer is really strong can be really difficult. I've had very difficult conversations with partners of people saying, well, I'm there sorting out the house, arranging the accommodation, managing everything, and my partner's just talking to the PA all day, and they're having a great time together. So massive importance in relationships. And the presence of any physical illness can have a significant effect on how you express your sexuality. And I think it's really important for any healthcare professionals out there listening right now that within the spinal units, there isn't too much support on the sexual side of things, but it's about listening to people. It's about opening up those conversations. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as I go through this. So it's about reducing these chains before people leave rehabilitation. And I know I had the luxury of being in Spinal Centre for 5 months. People might not necessarily call that a luxury, but I felt it was. The psychological adjustment was more manageable often when we're being released 12 weeks after an injury, sometimes before. How are we doing that here? So, okay. It's really important to think what sexuality means to you, means to a partner. Thinking about, sometimes we just think sex is sex, but actually it's all of us, who we are, where we see ourselves on the gender scale, where we feel, for me, it was about being feminine, about maintaining my femininity, about maintaining my high heels. I was told all the time, you can't wear this, you can't wear that, and that stopped me being Michelle. So I had to find myself. I wanted to wear high heels. Now I have 4 different foot plates. 4 different foot plates for all my different types of shoes. So it's about that managing how we adjust. So it's everything, isn't it? It's feelings, psychological, emotional, it's our gender roles, our self-image, pleasure, how we receive pleasure now. And last week that was interesting, listening to the 2 amazing ladies that spoke last week, thinking about, and I think one of them said, how do we get to the new way? We're still expecting the old way. And I thought that was, I hear that so often. And so, not brave to say, but just amazing for other people to hear, because so many people feel this way. And it is often about letting go of our expectations of the old sexual life that we led and opening ourselves up to a new, different sexual life, sexual experience. So I work a lot with initiation. The amount of times I hear that, the spinally injured person has become the lazy person. I can't do that. It's like, actually, use this, use your voice. I've been working with this most amazing couple, and looking and really experimenting with how he, as a high-level tetraplegic, can please her, what they can do, how they can be playful again. Because if we don't have the fun, if the fun disappears, why would we want to initiate sex again? And if you've heard me talk before, you'll have heard me say this story, but I find it so powerful because it's what set me off on this passionate drive to do this work. I left the spinal unit probably a month after my injury to go home on then what we classed as weekend leave. Me and my partner had been together 4 months before my accident. I was in a heterosexual relationship. We were experimenting and playful before. I came off the back of his motorbike, so a lot of emotional things going on for both of us. Came out on weekend leave and thought, right, let's give this sex thing a go. Let's try. I had an indwelling catheter in. I had no idea at that point whether I was going to live with that for the rest of my life or not. I was a racing cyclist before. My legs had gone to nothing. My stomach had bloated and changed shape. I hated my body. When I picked up my legs, they felt like chicken, felt like holding a piece of chicken thigh. And I didn't like looking at them. So not only was I struggling with the way I looked and not feeling sexy and having a bag of wee strapped to me, I was terrified about what my partner was thinking. He'd met this fit young girl and then all of a sudden I felt useless. So I laid down on the floor, not knowing if that was the right thing to do or not, because I was terrified that I might get pressure sore. My partner laid on top of me, and how he maintained his erection, I have no idea. Luckily, because I'm T12, I did still lubricate. I didn't know whether I would or I wouldn't. That could have been dangerous. As my partner laid on top of me and me feeling so not sexy at this point, I let out the most amazing amount of wind. So then I'm really feeling not sexy at all. We laughed, carried on, and penetration was terrifying. He was terrified, I was terrified. I said, I don't feel anything. Why I thought I would, I have no idea. And cried. And he said, I feel like I'm raping you, we can't do this. It took us a long time after that to be able to get back to holding and cuddling and being able to manage that intimate time together, because often we expect that to move on to sex, and sex for us had become a really difficult thing to do. And the reason I talk about that on such a personal level is because I know this happens to so many people. And it is difficult. And so that's why when I'm doing the therapy, we talk about taking it to a different place. We talk about sensation and touch, and we use a lot of work. We do a lot of work on communication and how we communicate, because in the English language, the words we have for our genitalia are not great. And so we'll do a session on, what words do we want to use? What words are acceptable? What words are funny? Often, if I get a lady coming into a session and she says something like, my daisy, I think, okay, we've got somebody really precious here who thinks their anatomy is extremely precious. What does that mean to them? How have they grown up with that? And more often than not, and it's quite a strange thing, but quite often people who describe their genitalia as childish things or flowery things can often have quite a lot of issues. So language can be really, really important when it comes to sex and how we communicate about it. So then we've got our own values. We've also got religion. We've also got everything that goes with who we are and how we are sexually. And then we've got relationships and intimacy and how we manage those. And then we've got reproduction and reproductive decisions. So they all can change. Obviously not our sexual orientations or our gender roles, but so much can change when we experience a spinal cord injury and within the relationship. So often people don't know where to go to get help. It's sometimes easier now, we've got the internet to look at, but are we getting the right information? Peer groups are amazing. There's obviously the SCI now have a lot of information out there. Backup have information on their websites about who to contact. There are 3 specialist sex therapists in the United Kingdom. Myself, obviously Michelle Donald, Sue Lennon, who is actually based in France but works over Zoom. So distance is no object at all. Sue and I train together. Sue works in oncology and spinal cord injury and different neurological issues. And another lady called Sue Newsham. Sue Newsham works a lot with brain injury, cerebral palsy, and spinal cord injury and MS. So the 3 of us kind of cover most neurological issues within the United Kingdom. There is Spokes. Spokes are an amazing agency. They have counselling. They have a counselling directory. They're amazing. And Enhance the UK have what's called a love lounge. So you can go in there and ask questions. It's fantastic. And there are obviously different Facebook groups and things like that. So when I first came out of hospital, I found it really difficult to find somewhere to go with access. It's like hotels, isn't it? They tell you that you can take your dog, but they don't tell you whether you can take your wheelchair in. So I put quite a bit of pressure on COSRAP, which is the College of Sex and Relationship Therapists, for therapists to actually say, whether their rooms are accessible or not, and to what extent they're accessible. And then if the counsellor does work via Zoom now, because obviously there's a lot more of that. So I think it's really important that, you know, a lot of people put this to one side, and after my very first experience, that's what I could have done. So there will always be a psychological response to change or loss when we don't feel our genitalia. So what I like to get across within the spinal centres is when a man asks for a tablet, I want my Viagra, or I've heard about Viagra and how does that work and can that help me? What is he really asking for? Now, in the very first session, that was covered extremely well, and literally go back to that first session to really think about what a reflex erection is and a psychogenic erection. So depending on your level of injury will depend on what sensation, what feeling, and the erectility around that. For women, it will depend on lubrication and sensation within the vagina. So some people with a low level injury, some people with vaginas with a low level injury, what can happen is often a lot of women think they've actually wet themselves, but we need to know what that liquid is, and we normally know by the smell of it. And quite often if we pull against the G-spot, so excuse me, I'll do a demonstration, but if you're pulling, so if that's on the inside of you and you're the person pulling on the inside, when you pull there, you can feel ridges. And on those ridges, as you pull them, some people class that as their G-spot, and sometimes that can let out liquid from the skin gland, and quite a lot of liquid. So a lot of women with low-level injuries who have never, and I suppose the word that the general public use for it is squirting, who have never done that before, can find that they can do that, and the research hasn't been done, but we know that this happens. And we also know there are some sensations with that pulling as well. So when I say, you know, when a man asks for a tablet, what's he actually asking for? This is where, as healthcare professionals, if we have time, gosh, you know, they're asking for hope. They're asking for explanations about a different intimate life and where they might find that. They might be saying, I'm scared to talk to my partner, help me. They might be saying, I hate myself now, I don't know what to do, I don't know how to date. So when somebody asks for a tablet, be really curious about that question. I think it's important to realise that obviously women have nothing on the outside of their bodies to make it obvious. So, you know, people can go, actually, I want a tablet because I want my penis to work. But as women, it's really difficult often for them to get their questions across about their sexuality. I think it's really important that we have women's groups within centres where maybe one of the questions within that, well, definitely one of the questions within that is, you know, how are you feeling about your body image? What do you think about relationships moving forward? How is a cuddle? You know, sometimes it's as simple as, you know, I was scared people used to come down at you unexpectedly. It's, you know, it's changed obviously quite a bit with COVID, but not necessarily all the time, and nearly tipped me out of my chair. So sometimes it's about how do you experience touch. We don't have to say the S word. And actually, you know, then, you know, as in our British culture, so to speak, then often it can be quite difficult looking at masturbation. You know, what were your masturbation habits before? How do you feel about that now? What might you want to do differently? So we know through the vagal system, which I'll come on to, there's a lot of feeling that can be gained via our vagal system. So I've said before, what's the point? I can't feel it. This is the biggest thing that people come and talk to me about. If I can't feel it, what's the point? So as a psychosexual therapist, we look at the new body, the difference and the way it now responds. And what I do with that is then unravel the meaning behind those sexual difficulties. Who are we now? How do we feel about the person we lost for a time, or the person we want to be or gain back? You know, a lot of people I'll talk to about where they are on their gender scale, their masculinity, their femininity, and how they feel about that, how it's changed how they feel about that. For me, it was my clothes and my body image. So we look to overcome them in a creative way. We look at new ways for people to be together intimately. Now, that can take time. We do a lot of body work, a lot of touch, a lot of play. You know, one person had his grab stick, and on his grab stick with his mouth, he put some feathers, and then he moved those up and down his partner's body. As she lay on the bed, he stayed in his chair. And then different things went in the grab stick for sensation, for things that were warm, that were cold. You know, and you can play with those. Let's use a blindfold if people feel comfortable. Let's play with new experience that gets us close. Let's look at it not having to be about penetration, depending, you know, whatever relationship you're in. So a lot of clients in sex therapy have little idea about what they're going to enjoy initially, sexually, people with spinal injury, because the desire to be normal overwhelm curiosity that they have about their own unique, their own unique way forward. They feel that there's less satisfaction, there's more difficulty communicating, higher levels of stress. And for some people, they think that what they're feeling now will last forever. So they start to use more avoidant coping strategies to push people away. Often people in relationships will try and push their partner away. Sometimes that might not even be obvious to them. You know, why do you want to be with me when you could have, you know, anybody? Why are you staying with me? And people ask that question all the time and try and push partners away. And that's often a normal reaction to have. I'm not good enough for me, so how can I be good enough for you? So a lot of the time it's about the coping and the adjustment initially, and that a lot of that happens in rehab, that building of your own self-confidence. And thinking that, you know, I remember coming home and having PAs, carers around a lot, and thinking my partner was just going to have to deal with that all the time and deal with it in the same way. But actually, as time's moved forward, as we all do, we all get more confident about our ability to push ourselves and do more for ourselves. So I think, you know, often partners or new partners can feel like, oh, that's a lot to cope with, but often we move forward from that. People do say, you know, what does a sex therapist do? Well, this is what my friends think I do. Definitely this is what my mum and, oh yeah, my partner's children, when I first met them, that's what they thought I did. What society thinks I do. What my boss thinks I do. What I think I do, but what I actually do. Like everybody, there's so much involved in a job. But I found that really wonderful. What my mum thinks I do make me laugh so much. So let's look at sexuality after injury and what guides my interventions, because people are often scared to go for therapy, but actually as a couple you can have quite a lot of fun. As an individual, I've been working a lot with for some reason a lot of ladies at the moment. Often people come in fits and starts. I'll get like 5 or 6 guys all at once, and then, you know, then 2 or 3 ladies all at once, and it's so I prefer to, if there is a couple, I would prefer to work with that couple, looking at what works for them and setting tasks. So I set tasks, they go away, they do those tasks, they come back into session, I take feedback and then set the next task depending on what's happened in the last task. Initially, there's no genital focus at all. It's all about movement around each other's bodies, communication, initiation, and just touch, and being able to to ask for what you want, so that communication of it. And then we move it forward slowly but surely to get to different places. So there are relationship factors in that. There's grief, there's less desire, less arousal, there can be avoidance, there can be fear, there can be catastrophizing, fear of more injury, fear of pain. So there's a lot of anxiety often. Hypervigilance, what if this happens, what if that happens, what if I don't get an erection, what if I don't lubricate, what if I wet myself, all of those things, what if I spasm. So within the therapy to start with, we touch on all of those things, and how people feel about them. When people come as individuals, often we'll work to a certain point. So as an individual, I'll probably see people anything from 2 to 6 times. As couples, we can easily do 12 to 20 sessions. So it's about, and then often people will come back to me if they've got into a relationship or when they're dating and go, what now? A lot of ladies at the moment I've been working with, we've moved them and they've been looking at doing some tantric work, which is always really, really interesting, about body movement, body touch and sensation. So what limits us? There's so much, and it isn't just a spinal injury, and we can always go, you know what, it's just a spinal injury. No. Do I overeat? Have I got diabetes, high blood pressure? Do I drink too much? Do I smoke too much? Medication, I think I've covered that quite well, or I will get on my high horse about it, and anxiety. So there are so many other things that get in the way. How we can feel about it, or change in body image that I've looked at, or loss of identity in hospital, always wearing those baggy clothes. It's about getting back to being you again. The body becoming public property, as I've looked at, everything takes longer, and our tiredness, and what is that about? Then we look at the impacts of culture and religion, and then we look at people that aren't sharing this, that aren't in a relationship, that might be scared to start dating again. So I'll often talk to people about, actually we'll do some visualizations, we'll do some work on how people, I've even worked with someone about how to put together their profile online. I've helped somebody when they've had a devotee, had issues with a devotee, and what's happened there. So it can be a very interesting time, and that's why I say it's really important that you need to be in the right headspace. Questions to self, these are the main things that come to me. Is my body going to do what it needs for intimacy to occur? Will my partner be turned off by me? How can I make sure sex is safe without ruining the moment? Will I orgasm too quickly, too slowly, or not at all? Will I ejaculate? How will I know what to do to turn another person on now? How to meet a new partner and sustain that relationship? How to get sexual satisfaction from their own experience, and whether having a child is possible, and how. So they're the first questions that I get asked within the centres. So as I said before, I do focus on the education, adjustment, communication. I've talked a little bit about this. We'll look at the meaning of intimacy to the couple, and we'll look at the communication. What does psychosexual therapy do, really? It allows a couple to become more comfortable and relaxed in each other's presence, and to begin, this was a couple that I'd worked with, to overcome awkwardness and anxiety. And I think last time, looking at what the ladies had said last time, it was beautiful in that, please don't have your boobs out while you're washing my husband. That's massive. That's, one time I was working with a couple, and she said she decided the first day that he came out of hospital, when the carers came in, that she'd carry on with her morning, getting ready for work. What she didn't expect was to walk in on a husband in the shower room with an erection, with 2 fairly pretty young ladies around him. She said the feelings that evoked were horrendous. She said, I went in, gave him a kiss, said goodbye, stepped out of the room and burst into tears. So I went and sat in the car, thought, how do I do this? Nobody had prepared her, nobody prepared her partner. And when it was talked about, that was about actually, he had an erection and nobody had told them what a reflex erection was and how it worked. Even the care team struggle. A lot of my work is around involving care teams and working with care teams, so that they might be the ones that can talk about sexuality. They might be the ones helping somebody get ready for a sexual experience, setting the room up if people are comfortable enough to let that happen. And that was really powerful in the last session. Actually, for the PA smells okay as well. How is that okay not to smell okay? And then there was something said about being defensive on the PA's part. So sometimes the partner being defensive and sticking up for the PA, and how that can make people feel really pushed out at a time when they need so much more. So no one's ever asked to undress or do anything sexual in the therapy room. I think people often think we all sit there rubbing each other's breasts. No one is asked to do homework that they do not understand the rationale for or that they can't face. And it's all about positive outcomes. So the tasks that are set are to enable those positive outcomes. And of course, we're going to get blocks. Of course, there might be tears. Of course, there might be anger. There's a lot to move from. It's like rebuilding a whole new sexual life from the beginning, about relaxing creativity and taking the spotlight off performance. And clients' goals are really varied. One guy, he was just fabulous, and he said, actually, all I want to do on a Sunday morning is sit in bed. He was in his 70s, sit in bed with my wife, read the paper and have a cuddle and a cup of tea. And that was his intimate life. And what had happened was he'd been sent home with a hospital bed and never thought to change that bed in all his time, because at the end of the day, the professionals had told him that that's what he needed. He'd progressed away from that bed. He felt so much better. He didn't need quite as much care as he thought he did. And we looked at enabling another bed to be able to go in that room. And sometimes that's not possible. Rooms are not always big enough. But often it's really important to look at the environment around you. I went to see, for a solicitor not long ago, I went to see a gentleman, a young guy who was in a holiday home for some time. He was going to be there for about a year because his accommodation needed adjusting. So he was going to be there for a long time. The room he was in had like a bathroom, a hospital bathroom floor. All his urinary products were out on show, and there was a hospital bed. And I said to him, so you're going to go out? And you're going to, because he liked to go out, pick up girls. He had done that before. He loved his one-night stands. And I said, okay. So yeah, you get somebody on your knee and that's great, and you're bringing them back, and yeah, okay, well, you talked about you're using your Viagra and you want to do this and that and the other. He had his own goals that he set for himself. I said, but actually, she walks in here, what does she see? Because she's seen you, but she's not seen your disability because of you. You're bright, you're open, she's attracted to that. And then you open this bedroom door and it just speaks disability. So actually, let's look at our environments and how they make us feel and how they make other people feel. So everyone's got their own goals. Not everyone should be or could be a sexual gymnast. Thank you to Pfizer for that slide. I always find that quite interesting. Enhancing pleasure. So what do we work with? Utilising memory and fantasy to enhance experience. So we know our brain's lazy. It shortcuts. How we deal with phobias is straight. Often a phobia is brought on by something that happens very quickly and it sticks in our brain. So actually looking at how our brain responds to things, it remembers things, it remembers the connections. So if we're, be quite graphic, if we're looking down at, say, a penis being sucked or oral sex in any way, our brain goes, oh, okay, I remember some of that. If we allow ourselves to relax, we allow some good chemicals to be released in that relaxation. Our oxytocin can help. And so when we've got serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin firing off in our brains, then we can feel relaxed about moving forward sexually. So relaxation is massive. When we're spectating all the time, is my body doing this? Is it doing that? That's when we can inhibit our own sexual pleasure. So we really need to think about becoming more attuned to other bodily indicators about sexual arousal. Incorporating other sexual stimulus such as visual, auditory, verbally, smells, whatever that might be. I ask people to set up rooms, making sure it's warm. Different things. I mean, some people like to watch erotic images together. Some people prefer stories or reading things to each other. Some people just prefer touch and eye gazing. Eye gazing is so passionate. And it can be really embarrassing initially. You look at each other and just look at each other, and then somebody will look away. But actually, the connections and the chemicals that produces, or even just holding each other. So a couple I work with at one of the hospitals, we got one of the healthcare assistants to help put him on the sofa, because at the time it was just with a mobile hoist, so she knew she could get a mobile hoist, use that herself, and he got on, and they'd not really touched for 8 months. He'd been in hospital for so long. And he said, I just want to hold her, and I can't hold her. So we set up this where he was sitting on the sofa. We'd looked at medications, we'd looked at his spasms, what had happened. She was terrified. And then in the end, this was set up weekly. And in the end, she actually sat on the back of the sofa and like just held him so tightly. He was in front of her, and that just made them burst into tears. They just cried, because that's how powerful touch is when we hold someone that we really love. And then they went from that to her actually taking her top off, and then being able to just, he could feel the top of his shoulders, and she put her breasts into the back of his neck. And he was just like, wow, this just feels amazing. And then they got a mirror to look at that. So really enhancing what works for you, whether that be mirrors, scent, whatever that is. And that's something that they were able to then move forward into their new home when they moved out, and be able to ask for help. So ask the PA to help with stripping the bed, ask the PA for help with sometimes that was showering in between. So he would get up and he'd want to shower in the morning, but actually he felt he wanted to be clean when they set up their scheduled time to be together. So occasionally they would set up that extra shower time for him. She would go downstairs, had a through lift, and she would go downstairs and just have her relaxation time on her own, and then go back into the room, and he was already on the bed, rather than them having to struggle to sort that out. Because she says, as we're getting older, I've got less energy. So there's so many different ways of incorporating things, and everyone is so unique. So that's why in the therapy programs it's really important that we do that initial assessment and look at I'm talking now about things, but this is so general. So body mapping. Body mapping is something that I use initially. So we'll talk about if people can lie prone, or depending on where they can lie on their beds, or even if they want to stay in their chairs. Being naked with each other if it's comfortable. And touching each other from top to bottom. And then people go, well, what's the point? I can't feel it. But actually watch the other person touch you in areas that you don't feel. Initially, it's like, well, grump, grump, grump. But actually, it's like, actually relax into that. Enable it to happen. How does it feel? The partner then says, oh, it's really soft around your ankles. And then as long as she doesn't get kicked and the spasms are okay. So this was an experiment that the couple have been doing recently. But actually just taking the hands up and down, and how does that feel? Where is it more hairy? Where is it less hairy? What does it feel for them? What are they experiencing looking at that? And again, that's about that relaxation. So touching each other top to bottom, bottom to top, whether you want to wear clothes or not, but clothes that you can touch the body through. And you might wear something that's really soft that you can touch through, because sometimes that feels more arousing. Then we've got the vagus system. So the vagus system is so important if we feel our nipples, if we feel behind the back of our ears and into the back of our nape and back of our neck, it connects those chemicals to our brain and releases those feel-good chemicals. So often people say that they feel like they've had an orgasm through their ears. Nipple sensation can often, so I know so many people that touching their nipples in a particular way when they're aroused and relaxed can actually make them feel like their genitalia is being touched. So that's all, again, it's about really exploring with that and being relaxed enough to feel it. I ask people to do their own self-focus exercises. So they, maybe in the bath or the shower, how do you feel when you put on moisturizer? How do you feel when you put on or when you scrub yourself, or when somebody's doing that to you in different areas? So somebody you love might be doing that, and disconnecting that from, actually a carer is doing this, but actually my partner's now doing this and it's a different part. So being able to box those off, we work a lot with how we can box one off from the other. So what it does is, it helps us rediscover our bodies again and our partner's bodies. Often we've not seen our partner for a long time, or it's a new partner. Let's play. Often people can be really tentative about touching, especially some painful areas. So it's about redefining that, as I said before. Is that pain? Is it tingling? Is it heat? What is the sensation? Initially, the sensation for me was horrendous, and I wouldn't let my partner touch my hypersensitive area. And then 2 years down the line, I went, oh, it feels different. So, but he was still like, well, you never let me touch you there before. I was like, oh, well, it feels different now. Well, how was I supposed to know that? So again, about that communicating and bringing that body mapping in on a regular basis. I ask people to do that as part of what's called the sensual focus exercises that we do. Talked a bit about PAs, as the ladies did last week. That was really, really interesting. About how that can feel, and that's a whole day's workshop on its own, and I'll leave that with the expertise of the ladies that spoke last week about this. How we manage our values and our priorities, asking for help maybe in preparing a room, how we manage the communication. And then we look at, and often one of those subjects a lot of people are scared to talk about, what about sexual surrogacy, sex worker, a tantric sex worker? And where do we find people like this to help us if we're single and want to experiment? I worked with a guy who was 17, and his father, he'd become spinally injured. He was quite a high level injury. He was tetraplegic, and he said, I want to go to uni, and I want to go to college and really explore, and then I want to go to uni and really explore. That was his value system, where he was going to go. And actually he went to see a tantric sex worker. So she worked with his breathing, with his confidence in how he asked questions, And this particular gentleman was heterosexual, and he was just like, well, how do I please women? How can I please women like this? And they had so much communication around that, and he came out of that session with so much confidence, and wanting to put that into play, so to speak. And how amazing that his dad actually went, yeah, I want my son to have the best life he can have. And that, for me, he said, that includes being confident about himself sexually. So sexual surrogate and sex worker, what's the difference? So a sexual surrogate is, and often they're called body workers as well, there's lots of different names. A sexual surrogate often works with a psychosexual therapist. So in the United Kingdom, I'm under COSRAT, the College of Sex and Relationship Therapists, our ethics won't allow us to work with sexual surrogates at the moment, because sexual surrogates in this country haven't got a governing body. But in America, there are sexual surrogates where your sex therapist actually talks to your sexual surrogate to work towards a goal that somebody wants to work towards. There's an absolutely amazing film called The Sessions, I think it's Holly Hunter, where a guy is in an iron lung, and it's about the relationship he has with his sexual therapist and his sexual surrogate. It's incredible, and he's priest, so that's a really interesting watch. Talking about watch, there's something on Netflix at the moment called Sex, Love and Goop. I would really recommend watching it. It's a good opener, and it can help people communicate about what they want and how to ask for it. Again, that's a subject that goes a long way. There's an organisation called SHADA, the Sexual Health and Disability Alliance. They have connections in there to the TLC Trust. The TLC Trust have sex workers on their site that have worked with disability, and it actually runs down what they work with, who they work with. People often ask me about positioning.
Michelle, I'm just going to interrupt you very briefly. We're coming up to the end of the hour. I think we should keep going if you've got time and are happy to go on with your presentation. If people can't stay for the rest of this session, then all the webinars have gone up on our website, and I will send another email around to everyone who's attended with the links once this webinar has gone up to catch the end. If you are going off early now, thank you so much for coming along. If you have questions that you want answered before you go, please work them in the question and answer or in the chat, and then we'll answer them. You can watch the answers when you log on to watch the catch up. Sorry about that, Michelle.
No worries.
Ruined your flow.
No,
which is something that I'm sure that you're used to dealing with in therapy. So I'll hand straight back over to you. There.
I was looking at the time, so no worries. So positioning is something I often get asked about, and like so many people, we make up our own positions. We have to play with that in a safe way, and we have to learn about what works for us and what doesn't. Bowel and bladder management, we know, and this has been touched on in the other sessions, there are so many things we can do to help that, and again, that's about how we do that. Often, it can be how a partner responds to it as well, that either gives us that good vibe or that bad vibe. I know when my peristene's not gone very well, I worry, so I become a spectator and get quite anxious. But sometimes accidents may be unavoidable. I have found, however, an amazing dog blanket that's waterproof on the underside, and it's really fluffy on one side. So that's quite good. Instead of putting towels down, it's a really nice little fluffy blanket. You can find them on Amazon. Been recommending those quite a lot. What people say. So this is kind of to when I was talking to a lot of women in the research that we did about how they felt about their sex life, I told him to stop pretty soon after he penetrated me because it was freaking me out and I couldn't feel it. So no, it wasn't a good experience. So again, very similar to my first experience, how you manage that moving forward. If you're going to meet a new partner and mess all over them, it's not the best start, is it? So those first initial ideas about how that works, but actually for this person, that was about managing their bowels and bladder better. So referral back into the spinal unit for that was the way to go. So it's always listening out for some of these questions, or the questions that you may be asking. It might be, actually, could I have a better sex life if I could do something different? We don't necessarily have to stick with the bowel and bladder regime we were given in spinal units. Look for different types of catheters that suit you better. Look for different catheter bags. Look for different attachments. Get in contact with your suppliers. They'll send you test kits out. So be proactive about that side of things. I hate feeling that I'm being not raped but used, just lying there. So for this person, what was that about? Was that they felt that they had to just lie there? Was that about their own value system? So often it's not just about, this isn't working for me. There's a different level that you go in with. I certainly hadn't accepted what I'm like. I don't like looking in the mirror. I don't like having photographs taken. I've gained a lot of weight. So obviously we work with the body image there, and that might be a referral back to psychology as well before any of the psychosexual work commences. Oh, let's go back. I'll just move through these. I felt a bit bad for him because if it was under normal circumstances, the lady would get up and clean themselves, wouldn't she? But if he wants sex with me, he also has to clean up the mess afterwards. So we have to look at that and go, actually, that's her value system. Is that her religion? Is that her value system? What is that about for her? She's feeling guilty that he has to do all of the work in that heterosexual relationship. Excuse me. It's hard because there's carers in the house all the time, knowing that somebody else might hear and be involved. And you can hear people walking down the corridor, and that makes it really awkward. So it's about, again, having that private time for you and setting those boundaries within that. And I know that's easier said than done. I talk to people in care homes about this all the time, having their own private space. Even in places where, in the hospitals, where you go out to a different centre to finish your rehab, or you have to go to a care home to do that. The amount of care homes where I go in and start therapy, and we get interrupted 4 or 5 times. So I make a privacy sign and just say, do not disturb me between these times. So really about that communication, isn't it, with our PAs. I'll run through those, but I'll leave them on the slides. If you want a copy of the slides, please ask. Not a problem sending those out. The reason I've left the anatomy of female arousal in the men's section is for the reason that often we know what happens. We've seen so many penises, it's fine. We've seen them whether we don't want to see them or not. They're on telly, they're on wherever they are, we've seen them. So what happens internally for women? Because we don't even see it ourselves. So internally for women, obviously you can see, can you see my arrow, Tom? I guess you can.
Yes.
So so you can see the vagina opening here, and you can see the uterus sitting above the bladder. As a woman gets aroused, this still happens with spinal cord injury, as she gets aroused, her vagina lengthens and widens. It might not lubricate due to this is via the vagal nerve as well, through the arousal system and the nipples, if that's happening. It may or may not lubricate, and again, that depends on so many things. So that depends on how old you are, whether you've gone through the menopause. By the way, anybody going through the menopause, and there may be women out there listening to this as well, it's so important to maintain your estrogen levels, the estrogen levels within the vagina, because otherwise it will atrophize. The skin will get thinner and sex will become painful. It's really, really important to keep that estrogen. And it's just a matter of getting sachets from the doctor. You might put it in once a week, depending on the different things that you get. So that is so important. Anyway, moving on. The uterus then elevates. So can you see from that first slide where the uterus starts and as she gets aroused, it elevates. And you can also see there that the vagina, when she's not aroused, is like this. And as she becomes aroused, it lengthens and widens. So that's really important to know that actually she needs to be aroused. And for anybody maybe using the Ferticare that to ejaculate, sometimes the Ferticare can be used to ejaculate. You can catch that in something, and then that can be inserted into the female for pregnancy. If that's happening, it's really, really important that she is aroused, because there's no point putting that in here. It's just going to come straight back out. So actually, let's look at that arousal level, because if she's aroused, then you get this tenting effect, and then there is somewhere for the semen to sit, if you will, before the uterus descends and the cervix dips into the seminal pool. So I think there's so much going on internally for women, but because we can't see it on the outside, we get ignored by so many medics, I suppose, because they talk about the penis, the PDE5 inhibitors, the Viagra's, etc. They talk about getting pregnant on the medical side. So it's really important to look at this. And the arousal that goes with that, because once the uterus is up there, it will stay up there for a good 5 to 8 minutes. So a second orgasm is then possible, and onwards and onwards, quite quickly afterwards, as opposed to letting it all go back to where it was originally. So this is the clitoris, which we forget is a very large area. Often we just see the glans, so we just see this, that's just underneath where the labia open. So when we just see this, we tend to think, oh, well, that's just the whole thing, where actually it goes all the way under the labia, right back to the perineal sponge. So for spinally injured women even, there's so much sensation through vibration. If it's a lower level injury, you can get vibration that goes through there. Lots of women will often use vibrators in the way they used to before, but actually often it's better to use it in different areas and really experiment with that. And this is an fMRI scan of the clitoris. So again, you can see how big it is and how quite beautiful it is, like a big butterfly. I was talking about the G-spot before, and the skein gland, and that's where it sits, just at the front of the bladder on that inside wall. We talked about the sexual hormones. I think it's really important to think about those hugs and cuddles and eye contact, and how the ability of a person to resolve emotional issues of spinal cord injury comes first. This is kind of a recap. The individual's ability to take emotional risks, the extent that the individual can value new sexual abilities and let go of old ones is the most important. Being able to communicate and being able to have the resolution and look into pre-injury difficulties. I'll move on from there. So we have come a long way. I think it's still one of those things within culture that we're scared to open up and talk about, but it's something that most people do. So let's do it and let's have fun. So thank you. I'll end that there. Let me just stop sharing my screen and look at some questions.
Hello. Hi.
Hey.
I thought that was excellent, Michelle. Thank you so much
No
for that. My immediate question is, I guess so many of the problems that people face in their sexuality are problems that people have predating that their injury. Do you feel that you're coming up against like those issues as a barrier to even getting started toward it to therapy and making practical suggestions?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment, there's a lot of young guys coming through, not just in the spinal world, but just in the general work. When I talk to my colleagues about the fact that watching watching so many erotic images when they're younger has enabled them to ejaculate and ejaculate quite quickly, and then add into that um, their their arousal levels. So watching porn, you can hit your arousal levels quite quickly because you get to watch what you want straight away, and that hits all those chemicals really quickly and really strongly. And often then they'll go into a relationship and their relationship doesn't hit those buttons as high, so they find it more difficult to get arousal within a relationship because of the amount of porn that they've watched. Now, porn is not a bad thing under any circumstances. For so many people, it's amazing, but it's about how often and how it makes you feel. So that's one of the biggest things that's coming through. Pardon the expression at the moment. I think obviously there's abuse, and working with the abuse and side of things. There was a lady who needed to use indwelling catheters. It was going to be the best way for her, but she couldn't cope with anything being inserted. To think about the fact that she'd had so many different objects inserted into her over the years that she just couldn't do an intermittent catheter. So we did a lot of work on that, and then looked at you know what what could what we could do instead, and actually eventually she did, and she looked at it like sewing, so we did it like a needle. That worked for her. Obviously that's not going to work for everyone, but yeah, just really incredible different things that to move people forward.
I think as well, like this, I mean, before you even get started on talking about the practicalities of sex, it's like, what is sex? Like, what do I want this to be? Why was it important to me? And one of the things that came out of all those conversations that I had in preparing for the webinars was that people just don't know how to answer that question. It's pleasure, but it's connection and it's closeness, and those are things that just you can always find one way or another. And it's, I suppose, that imagery, that pornography that people see is not helpful in the way that it shows what sex should be. And I guess, is that like, does we, the images that we see of sex, and I say this as a gay man, but the images that I've been exposed to of sex generally in the world that are out there are not representative really of what it's like actually having sex. If you're then disabled or gay or whatever, it's really hard to get people's imaginations going along those lines. And
Mm.
that's, I suppose, where you step in.
Yeah, you're right to me. It is hard, and as one of the ladies said last week, how do I make it interesting? Um, you know, she said, how do I make it interesting? And I've got and as I said before, expecting the old way, and then with the porn, that breeds into that expecting the old way because you're constantly looking at images of those able people. So that's why it's so difficult, because it's about making up your own new way, what works for you. And you can't, you know, mind you, most of us at the end of the day, if you look at the pornographic images and the actions that they're doing, most of us can't get into half the positions they're getting into anyway, or do half of the things that they're doing anyway. So it's about detaching from it and making it fun, and really thinking about how it arouses you so that you can then be aroused with your partner. But a lot of people can go through a lot of grief watching it as well. I can't do that. Somebody else could make you happier because they can do that with you. Um, working with a couple of guys, so there's the Ferticare that can, for some people, enable ejaculation. He said, actually, if I want to see your cum, if I'm going to come, I want to see your ejaculation. So come on, and that was part of their sex play. That's what they wanted. And I just find it. I mean, everyone's so unique. Um, it's not astounding. It's just quite beautiful, actually, how unique we all are. Um, and people surprise me all the time in a good way about how they move forward with things. Because once they start opening up, it's a pleasure to work with people, and people are always so scared to make that first contact. I had a lady this morning, she went, I'm terrified. It's like, I think I'm more easy to talk to.
I mean, it's so scary to talk about, for anyone to talk about sex. I mean, in the conversation that I had with the partners ahead of that webinar, right at the end, just before we did the webinar, we had a chat. Right at the end, they turned to me and were like, "Well, when are we going to hear about your sex life then, Tom?" And you're just floored because you're just so not used to having those questions asked of you. And with so much, it's just communication is so important. And if that's communication, I need a hug to communication. It's going to turn me on to have sex in this position. It's stuff that people shouldn't be afraid to own. I mean, do you work with other cultures? Are the British people particularly bad at this stuff?
No, brilliant question. Yes, and initially it was so funny. I remember being at Relate and falling out of my chair onto the floor because I was transferring into another chair, and it was the first Muslim couple that I'd ever worked with, and I knew the issue was to do with ejaculation, and so I was like, okay, I need to put him on a masturbation program, and how's he going to do that? Because does he want to masturbate? Will she have to be in the room? So I've got all these like terrified things going on in my head, and then I fell out of my chair, and they helped me, and they said eventually when we finished, like started communicating, and they said we were terrified about coming to see a white woman in a wheelchair. I was like, I was terrified because you were going to be my first Muslim couple and I didn't know. And then I just thought, we're all so the same, especially when it comes to sex. Yes, we all have different rules about sex, but within the same culture, we all have different rules about sex. So I think it's about being transparent. In some cultures, they've got to be so clean. And then, often we hear that, I just want them to have a shower before we go to bed together. And in some cultures, that's never going to be an issue. Yes, there are different issues within cultures to do with, so sometimes it's about non-education. So a lady that I was seeing, she said, how do I get that, which was pointing at his penis, into here? Because she thought her hole was only her vagina, her urethra. She'd had no education at all. So yeah, there's so much, but I think being transparent is the biggest thing we can be.
I think I think that, like, coming out speaking to those guys and having, when they're all sitting around talking about their sex lives, it fills you with envy, because people have, in order to have a good sex life, you're forced to talk. But I think that's probably applies to everyone. Have you always personally been really sexually liberated, or
No, I haven't. And even now, friends of mine will say, "Oh, come out to this club," and I'll go, "No, no, I don't want to." So I like, I like my, not necessarily vanilla sex, but I like my sex the way I like it. Do you know what I mean? And it's really interesting because when I did the SIA conference for the solicitors last week, I do a thing about thumbs up and thumbs down. So I say, I say, judge me. So what do you think I drive an estate car? Do you think I have lots of lovers? Do you think I'm a Christian? And it's so surprising, people like that. And when I said, do you think I drive an estate car? Everyone's like that. And I'm like, I do drive an estate car. So it's about judgments that we make all the time, isn't it? And I just think it's really interesting because some people will have the same partner all their lives and have the most amazing sex. Some people don't have sex at all and they have amazing relationships. And some people have lots of partners. It's good for them. So it's about getting down to the brass tacks and finding out what it is, and if they're coming to me and there's an issue, what's the issue around that? If they've got lots of lovers or their relationships only last 7 years, what's the pattern that's going on there? If it works for them and they're happy with their 7-year itch kind of thing, leave it there. But if it's not working for them, actually, let's look at the patterns behind it. So yeah.
And one thing as well, I have one more question. Sorry, I just always feel I could speak to you for forever about these things, but you had talked a bit about the some of the research projects you were doing, and some of the people who are in relationships with and with spinal cord injured men who had been victims of abuse in the past. And I just wondered about some of the psychology behind that, and if you would share along those lines.
Again, it's often really interesting, and the amount of people that I do come across where the female, and I'm just trying to think of numbers, but there's a lot where I come across new relationships where one person is spinally injured and the other person, the able-bodied person, was abused, and often how they feel that they can't be penetrated unless it's on their terms by their partner. So it enables them to feel that they have some control. And unconsciously, most of the time, that's how these relationships have started. And that's the really interesting part, because it is so unconscious that they've chosen a partner that can't penetrate them. I do find that so interesting. And sometimes it's worth bringing that into the room as an observation. And I'll look at the history takes, and sometimes it's just there. And actually, I'll talk to my supervisor. Do you think this needs to be looked at or brought into the room? And that's a really interesting decision to make. So every sex therapist has a supervisor, and every supervisor has a supervisor. So you're not actually ever working on your own. You've always got somebody to work with and ask these difficult questions. But yeah, it's an amazing phenomenon at the end of the day. It's it's out there a lot.
It's just interesting, people finding each other across the spectrum where there is that fit, and the fit is completely like subconscious decision. It's only sitting in the room and having that conversation where people realize what is actually going on.
And then how it changes sometimes, because how it can change is that actually, and I hate the word able-bodied, but the able-bodied person then goes, you know what, I want them to do more now. I want them to be more active in the bedroom than submissive. So it's really looking at how that can change over time when they feel confident with that person. That then it's like, right, okay, well, I trust you to be okay with me.
And that's it as well. Sometimes speaking to the women in particular about sex life evolution, at a certain point, like everyone's sex life changes over the course of their lives. Everyone's relationships changes over the course of their lives. Everyone is dealing with lots of different pressures in their life that prevent them from having sex, or you know, all of these things are real, and for absolutely everybody. And the injury just gets subsumed into that mix, basically. And it's just interesting that you were saying that the focus can be on the injury preventing sex, but often there's so much other stuff that's going on, and you know, people having children, people just getting a bit tired, people not communicating, is all in there as well.
And it's interesting what Ian said in the first talk. He said something about when you've been with, and I've heard this many times, when you've been with a spinally injured man, you don't go back. But again, it's like come down to it, comes down to that communication, doesn't it? That being able to. And I remember a girl saying to me, it's in America, if oh gosh, what did she say? It weeds out the jerks. And I was laughing so hard, and then this other younger girl went, "What if you're not ready for the jerks to be weeded out?" And I was like, that just so sums it up. It was so different, and that was just
Surely we're always ready for the jerks to be weeded out. No?
apparently not.
Oh, okay, fine.
So interesting. So thank you. It's been
Yeah, amazing. Sorry, I just keep you here forever. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I'm sure everyone else does as well. We'll put it
thank
up
you
on
for those
the
14
website.
of you that have stayed with us to the end.
I know.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, thanks, Michelle. Thank you to the people who are still with us. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all the webinars and coming along. And yeah, keep your eyes out. We'll send the link around. And thanks again, Michelle. Perfect.
Thank you,
Great.
Tom. It's been brilliant. Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.